Oh, come on. Who left this newly rebuilt 3.2 litre GTA engine on the floor? I nearly spilt my beer. Yes, we finally have an engine. Probably worked it out by now, but this isn't the same engine that we've been using to mock everything up with. My dad was getting a little bit bored, so he decided he needed a project, and at about that time we came across a 3.2 litre GTA engine and 6-speed manual box for a fairly reasonable price. So he purchased that, and he's spent the last however many months in another Burn engineering workshop rebuilding this bad boy for us. So it's been completely stripped down. Top end is pretty much standard, or it is completely standard. It's just been checked out and refreshed where required. We were looking at getting some different cams, but the ones we could find were horrendously expensive, and it was really hard to get any info on what the cams were made for. So we figured we'd build the engine, drive it, and then get an idea of maybe where some deficiencies were that we could sort out with cams. We've got brand new pistons with a slightly higher compression ratio than standard. These engines are already up there on the compression ratio, and we didn't want to push it too much, so they're on the limit of what we think we can run with 98 octane, which we have to run, but they've got deeper pockets, so if we want to run more lift with some bigger cams in the future, we've got that option. We've got some new rods, brand new bearings, and basically a brand new engine. Things are getting very exciting. So first off, I think we'll attack getting this gearbox on. This is the gearbox that came with this engine. It's the same as the one we've been playing with, 6-speed box. Opened it up, had a good look at the gear sets and the synchros. Everything looks really good in there. Thrown away the original Q2 LSD that came with the gearbox and replaced it with a really nice clutch pack LSD from the UK, which should be much better suited to a rear-wheel drive application. We've also had reports and seen some photos of the back of these gearboxes failing, the castings failing, and having a look internally, you can sort of see why. They're very thin castings back here, so we've welded on a strengthening plate onto the back. It welded on really well. They've used some really good quality aluminium for the casting, so I think that should solve that issue. So running the standard clutch setup, but it's brand new friction plate and pressure plate. Flywheel's the standard flywheel, but it's been machined up and checked and it's all good to go. Running the standard setup so that we can sort of keep the clutch as a bit like the fuse in the driveline system. It should be the first thing to go, and hopefully means that we don't break anything more expensive. So this is a bit of an unusual setup to what I'm used to. It's a the pressure plate is a pull type rather than a push type, which means that the thrust bearing actually ends up clicking into the pressure plate, and you can't remove it. So it's a bit of a one-shot deal. You can eventually pull this off if you need to, but it means you've got to take the pressure plate off the flywheel. So let's hope it works first time. So we'll just slide that onto the input shaft of the gearbox and see if we can get this gearbox to mate up with our engine. Starter motor's in, and a while ago I machined up this bracket to bolt on this power junction box, which lives here. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to use this is that there's a couple of sensors, the alternator and the starter motor cables all have to live underneath the manifold on this side. I'd like to be able to remove the engine without having to take the manifold off. So all the connectors, all the electrical connectors that go underneath the manifold, I'm going to bring out here to this location so that I can disconnect them here and then we can remove the engine. So now it's time to do a little bit of sub-wiring on this side of the engine. I think everything on this side is now wired up. Alternator's all wired up. We've got oil pressure sensor and oil temperature sensor. These sensors were starting to come out quite a long way, so rather than use the plugs, which would have brought the wires out even further, I've permanently connected the wires and then potted the sensors, so they've got a flying lead back to a connector that we'll put on back here. Starter motor's all wired up, so now I can put on the manifold, exhaust manifold, and connect up the EGTs. To quote this old Tony, this is one of the few times that I wish there was a responsible adult in the room, but Dylan's here, so that's the next best thing. Let's see if we can put this engine in the car. We need to trim down some of this nice silicon hose for our coolant system to the engine and from the engine. And so I've devised this in no way dodgy or dangerous method of cutting this tube to leave a nice factory square edge. So I've got this bit of bar stock, which is the right OD for the ID of the tube, and I've lined up the bed of the lathe so that this blade just clears the end of the bar stock. I've got the steady at the back so that the silicon tube doesn't flap around in the breeze. Line our mark up. Out there. Forgot to put the hose clamp on. Hose clamp. Inappropriate screwdriver to do it up with. Okay. As you can imagine, this is not a speedy lathe process, so I've got the lathe turned down to pretty much as slow as it can go. And then we will just wind that in. Factory. Bit of a jump in time. Got a lot of stuff connected up, including reinstalling the throttle bodies. I've also installed the injectors. These are the original 3.2 injectors. They should be fine. They've all been ultrasonically cleaned, new O-rings, and have been flow tested to make sure they're all still in range, and they came back all A-OK, so we're good to go there. Time to look at some more wiring, and I've already made quite a bit of a start on the wiring in preparation for the engine. So I've made this little sort of aluminium manifold, and that sort of distributes all the injectors, all the coils, the air temp and throttle position sensor all in one little sort of sub-loom, and that'll hopefully hide in there, and then we can route all these wires back into our ECU. I am pleased to say that all the wiring on the engine is completed. Which means all that's left to do is connect all these wires to our ECU. So as you can see, a fair bit has happened since the last video. So why don't you grab yourself a safety beer and let's do a quick tour. So we'll start at the front. Knocked up a quick aluminium front spoiler, and there's some cheap eBay lights that I'm using for the parkers / running lights. Everything under the bonnet seems to be behaving itself. The cooling system bled up no problem. And even after 5 hours on the dyno, no real overheating issues. I've had it idling outside in some very hot summer weather, and it'll sit at a constant 82 degrees without too much issue. Both fans do come on, but I think the cooling is under control. No issues with the front suspension so far. Done a full setup of the car, running 3.5 degrees of negative camber on the front, about 1 degree on the rear. Couple of mil toe in on the front and 0 toe on the rear. It all adjusted really well. It's sitting at about the right ride height. Haven't got any vehicle scales yet. I'll be getting some of those soon. So I haven't done a proper corner weight, but yeah, all working. And as a few people pointed out, in my haste, I put the bottom ball joint around the wrong way. So it was relying purely on the M8 bolts to hold that bottom ball joint into that bottom arm. I've since rectified that situation thanks to those that pointed that one out to me. So some of the events we compete in run this safety system called Rally Safe, which sends GPS data from each competition vehicle back to home base, so the organisers know straight away if a vehicle's got some issues or has had an accident. You know, they can halt that stage and send the appropriate safety crew out to give some assistance. So that's what this little unit is, embedded in the air scoop. This houses a GPS antenna and a satellite communications link antenna. The downside of this system is, unfortunately, they always know our speed, so absolutely no speeding on those transport stages anymore. So the cabin turned out to be quite a nice place to be. Everything ergonomically has worked out really nicely. The pedals are really good. They're not offset. They're in a good spot. Enough clearance around the steering wheel. Really good vision. I'm sitting a little bit higher than I will be when we're racing. I'll take some of the cushioning out. But yeah, everything's working really well. The gear shift is super nice, really short throw, really direct. My mum got the sewing machine out and decided to make up this really nice leather dashboard cover. That's come up really well. Door cars have come up really well. Got a nice deep pocket there. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to fit our helmets in there, but a nice big pocket in there for gloves and balaclavas and stuff. Spot for our phones and wallets and sunglasses. My little dash display is in and talking to the health tech and working really nicely. Since also got a full tyre pressure monitoring system on the car that's running through the Heltec, so that's getting displayed on the dash as well. After driving it for about 30 seconds, I realised that a reverse camera was absolutely mandatory, so I've added a little secondary screen down here that's got a wireless reverse camera off the back shell. But yeah, all in all, very happy with how the cabin's come out. Went black inside, as you know, to hide the cage, and I think that's worked out really well. As tight as it is, I think we've managed to utilise the available space very, very well. Brakes all bled up really well. No leaks apart from one in the master cylinder reservoir, and that was just a fitting that was bottoming out before it was pushing hard up against the seat, so that was an easy fix. Cleaning up the brake fluid wasn't so easy, but it's all done now. Everything under here has been behaving itself so far. No leaks. I'm sure they're coming. But so far, so good. Tanks are doing their thing. No issues there. I've also added one of these little gauges on each side. And that just gives us a live reading of the fuel level in litres in each tank. It's just really handy when you're filling the car up with jerry cans on the side of the road. Down here you can see our welded on strengthening brace on the back of the gearbox casing. Let's hope that was a good idea. As expected, trying to set up and sync 6 individual throttle bodies has been a massive pain in the ass, but I think I've got it pretty right now. A lot of tweaking's going on here between each throttle body and then between the 2 banks to get it running as evenly as I can. I've added an additional spring on this side to help out the closing of the throttle back to idle, and I've also rotated this this cam further out so that we get a more progressive throttle. I guess the 0 to 30% of actual throttle rotation is sort of 0 to 80% of sort of the throttle response. So I've tried to make it a lot slower at the start and then speed up, and that seems to have improved the drivability somewhat. I'm sure there'll be a lot of fiddling to come though. Alternator's doing its thing and punching out a constant 13.8 volts no matter what we throw at it, and pretty much from idle as well. Had some issues with some noise on the throttle position sensor signal, so I ditched the sort of budget throttle position sensor that came with the Genvi kit and bought a contactless throttle position sensor from Heltec. That's improved it, but I'm still chasing a little bit of noise on that signal. I think it's down to some EMF, which is always fun to try and track down and then fix. For the moment, I'm running some fairly heavy filtering on the throttle position sensor, and that's doing the job, so all good. Yes, the filters are big enough. Not really all that much to talk about at the back. I mentioned that I added a reverse camera, so to sort of integrate that, I modelled up the reverse light lens on that side and replaced the fog light that was on this side with a 3D printed version of the reverse lens that incorporates the reverse camera. And like I said, it's wireless to the screen, so it just runs off the 12 volts that comes in that would have powered that globe. Yeah, the mini boot all works. Space for our gear bags and helmets. And the noise, well, it's actually a lot quieter than I thought it was going to be until you really give it some, which is absolutely perfect. So super happy with how it sounds. So after 2.5 years, a shit ton of welding gas and grinding discs, and even more safety beers, the Stratos is finished. Well, I mean, a rally car's never finished, but it's together, it runs and it drives. So I'm calling it. That is the end of the Stratos Tarmac rally car build. We've got our first track outing booked for about 5 days away up at Winton. If that all goes well, we've also entered Targa High Country. That's in about 5 weeks. That's pretty close. a lot of things need to align and go right for us to make that, but it's looking pretty good at the moment. I'll be sure to post a bit of video footage of those two outings, assuming we make it there. But like I said, I'm calling it. That's it for the build series. Thanks everyone that's been watching and following along, and I'd particularly like to thank all the people that have been making those awesome comments underneath each video. There's quite a few regulars there. Thanks heaps, guys. So until next time, I'm not sure when that'll be, all I'll say is cheers.